I think this time maybe we'll get there. There we go. That's a beautiful trout. All right. I am fishing a really cool piece of water here. It's a freestone river that's now gone down into the valley. Come out of the mountains, gone to the valley, and the character of it's changed quite a bit. It goes from a much higher gradient, rocky river with a lot of pocket water and nice pools and runs to a valley river where those features are spread out a lot more, and there's a fish. And what we end up having is water that's much less obvious to fish because you don't have those big features, those big rocks that are creating obvious seams and holding spots. So now where I'm at is on a run that is pretty long, almost uniform in looking. There's no real obvious features, but what I'm trying to find here are spots where the rocks that are on the far bank have scoured out a depression, which the fish can hide in, but also save some energy and some slower water. But also, I did fish downstream of here to begin with and found nothing. And in the past, I have caught fish down there, quite often in fact. But today, we're on what so far is the warmest day of the year in mid-April. It's been, you know, typical winter and early spring, quite cold around here, and then all of a sudden the last couple of days we've finally gotten into the high 60s, and today it's supposed to be 70 degrees. There's a nice brown trout. So what I think has happened, until now, I've been searching for fish in slower winter holding water. And downstream of me in this run, nice chubby brown trout, see you later. Downstream of me in this run, this riprap that the ranchers place here to kind of keep the river from eroding the bank, it continues all the way to the bottom, and there's some nice scoured out depressions down there, but the water definitely slows in speed down there. And even though it's not very fast right here, it's noticeably faster than where I started. And what we had yesterday and what I've already seen so far this morning, we do have a lot of midges that are already out, but also some of the first blueing olives or baetis mayflies for the year. So to target those, it may seem completely counterintuitive, and I have plenty of other, baetis imitations like the diabetes and some Lite Brites and peacock and whatnot. But I have on the end of a microliter here, and we'll go through the specific rigging. But I have a 2.8 millimeter bead pink Lite Brite Perdigon. It's obviously not baetis in color, but the fish in this river love a little bit of fluorescence. Seems to set it apart in the drift, especially when you have a little bit of color like this, right? Like we have right now. I mean, the water viz is maybe 2 feet max, so it's not super clear. So having something that sets your fly apart in the drift is nice. So I've got a fluorescent pink Lite Brite, and then I have a front end loader, specifically a foam front end loader, caddis, about 3 feet above that. And my whole leader length, I am fishing a micro Euro nymphing leader here, just with a dry dropper on it. My whole leader length is about twice the length of my rod. My rod is just over 10.5 feet long. So I have about a 21-foot leader. About 15 feet of that, maybe 14 feet, is just cider material that is a little bit smaller than 4X. And then the rest of it is just 6X tippet, because I do expect some larger fish in here. I haven't gone to 7X, I've stayed with 6. And that is my rigging. Pretty simple. Basically, I just have two materials on the rig. And in this slower, smoother water, I'm starting with the dry dropper to begin with. because that distance, I can fish a little further away from me and get a better drift than I can with the straight Euro rig. And in the slower water, I can also suspend the rig and get a little better drift. I probably will nymph this spot here in a second, but I'll start a little higher in the column. I always like to work shallow to deep. I just had a fish rise up here. That's a good sign. So I've got my fly suspended to begin with. I don't know specifically how deep it is out there, but I'm guessing there's another fish. It's somewhere in the neighborhood of 4-ish feet maybe. I've got, you know, maybe 3.5. I haven't hooked bottom at all with this rig yet with a 3-foot dropper. So, you know, and that's not going to be completely vertical, but at least it tells me it's somewhere in that neighborhood or a little bit deeper. And so I'll start with this shallower dry dropper rig, and then I can work a little bit deeper afterward with the nymph rig. And normally, once I find the congregation of fish, there's going to be multiples like we've got right here. This is another brown trout, which is kind of interesting because this river often has more rainbows than brown trout. But the first 2 fish to the net are brownies. This one a little bit bigger than the first. Once again, it took that pink Lite Brite. Let's see. Come on, fish. Give me that fly back. Got the tippet caught in your teeth. There we go. Nice, chunky 13-ish, 14-inch brown trout. Probably 13. And I forgot to mention it before, but this specific fly, the pink Lite Brite, it's tied on a size 22 Fulling Mill Jig Force short, which is the 51-25. That's about a size 18 compared to a lot of hooks. So that might sound really small for a 2.8 millimeter bead on the front, but it's not once you have it in hand and see the length of it. All right, so let's describe a little bit about how I'm fishing this specific leader and rig. So once again, I got about that 3-foot dropper, and one of the benefits of this micro Euro nymphing leader, oh, there's another fish. Maybe they'll let me talk about it here in a second. We'll wait. Oh, another brown. This is quite surprising. I wonder if the rainbows have pulled up into the faster water still at the head of the run. See, what you guys don't know is I was starting to get a little downtrodden because I was expecting some fish in the bottom of this run. And I fished it for a fair amount of time. And Dominic behind the lens here was being so confident and so kind, having faith in me, and I thought I was letting him down because I was not catching fish. But I just need to move forward. And that is so common in a valley river like this. That's a pretty typical scenario, is you're going to find a specific spot where on the given day, with the given water temperature, the given hatch scenario, there's going to be an area in a long run like this that just has the right combination of water temperature, water depth, and current speed. And that water that was below me, I think it was just too slow. I think they've pulled up into this a little bit faster water now that the water temperatures are higher and that the bugs are more active. And when they have more water per unit, or water volume per unit of time going past their face, that gives more opportunity for food to go past their face, basically, because there's just more chance that bugs are entrained in that water and more of it's going past them, and so they get to feed more. But when the water temperatures are cold, they may not care about that. They're just trying to save energy. And they'll take, there's another fish on the downstream drift there. They'll take poorer feeding conditions in slow water. There's the first rainbow. All right, that's good. In that slow winter holding water, they can save a lot of energy, but they've got less water. per unit of time going past their face. And so they end up having less opportunity to feed, but they have energy savings. Now, the water temperatures are a little better. They'll work a little harder to stay in faster water. And this is still not very fast water. There's a riffle upstream here where I know they'll be in, especially a little bit later as the baetis really get going. But this nice, deeper, slightly faster paced water still is also a good shout right now. There we go. First rainbow of the day. See you later, buddy. Okay, let's actually talk about how I'm fishing this now. So I have this micro leader that I was talking about. The last 3 or 4 feet of the micro leader on that indicator portion is greased. I've also greased the tippet that's above my dry fly. And that is allowing at least a little bit of that to float to make it easier to pick up off of the water when I need to make mends. Because what I'm doing, I am laying much of my rig on the water. Probably the last few feet at least of the indicator material, and then all of that tippet. And if I were in a pocket water situation with this rig, I could high stick the whole leader off. But because I'm in a much slower, smoother, more nondescript water without defined seams, it's easier, and I affect the drift less by any sort of sag or tension by laying a lot of that on the water, and then I'm basically just going about mending like I would in a typical indicator scenario, strike indicator rig, but the difference being I don't have any fly line out there. I just have micro leader. So the mending movement ends up being a little different. I don't have mass in a fly line to roll and a little rolling mend. So a lot of times I'll just, whoops, ticked bottom there. I will lift the rod up and do a little bit of a roll with the rod tip. And if I have up or downstream wind, it can usually assist me. So I have a downstream to upstream wind right now. If I lift and just shake the rod tip up to down, that rolls that micro leader off the water, and the wind takes care of the rest. It repositions the micro leader upstream. Okay, so I think I've found the specific depression now and why I was probably getting those fish. There is a set of rocks that comes out from the bank here, it looks like. It's causing just a little bit of turbulence on the surface. It's barely noticeable, but there are some little wave points up there that are counter to what the water is around it. And I can now see a dark shape, dark shadow with a light shape up front, which is probably rock. And I just made a couple casts up there and my rig hit the bottom instantly. Just below that, in the water right in front of me, is where I've been catching all the fish. And that's that depression. Those rocks that are just up there that scoured out this soft bottom of this valley river below that and made a little bit of a depression where they can hold. And I soaked my dry fly a little bit there and wasn't quite floating great anymore, so I'm gonna quickly banjo it, get the water out, and we'll throw it in a little fly dip to get it floating like new again. All right, I just treated that dry fly, so let's go through a couple drifts again. So at the beginning of the drift, with this dry dropper rig on a micro leader, if you're not careful about the way you cast, it can be pretty easy to tangle. So let's take you through a cast just real quick. Really what's doing, oops, actually we'll do it after this fish. This is a little better one. Much better fish. Oh. Yeah, I'm not quite sure what this is yet, but it's large. Much bigger head shakes than the first few fish there. But I haven't gotten a good look yet. I'm kind of waiting for it to decide that it wants to say goodbye really quickly. Maybe I'll get lucky and it won't, but... Oh, that's a nice brown. Oh, that's a real nice brown. Great color on it. Which I guess it doesn't surprise me that it's a brown, because a lot of times when you get a rainbow this size in this river, they either vault into the air right away or go on some sort of kamikaze run. So when I felt the head shakes but no blistering craziness, it only made sense that it was a brown trout. And yes, wild brown trout like fluorescent pink light bright Perdigons as well. Okay, I'm gonna back off that drag a little bit. That's a gorgeous trout. Oh my goodness. That's just got unbelievable color on it. Really dark green back, reddish orange belly. I mean, almost still looks like it's in spawning colors, but we're in spring. That's awesome. Now, when I hook this trout on a big fish like that, you set your hook downstream, and then you immediately want to get your rod angle upstream and to the side. And wherever the fish is at, I try and keep the butt section just 5 degrees past perpendicular to wherever the fish is at. So you can see I'm rotating the rod as the fish comes upstream of me. And then that puts the fish upstream of me so that the current helps me net the fish. If I didn't move the rod this way and get it above me, and I tried to net it from downstream, it's much more likely, number one, I'd have to fight the fish a lot longer, but it's much more likely I'd break the tippet, or when I go to net that fish, there's so much more tension on the line from the current pulling on it instead of helping it getting into the net that I'm more likely to have the fly just come out as well. So I always try and land, especially bigger fish, but most fish altogether, by setting the hook downstream and then moving that rod laterally to the side, try and get them upstream of me and have the current help me. Oh, and multiple times now I thought he might be about ready, but he's got one more little bout in there. I think this time maybe we'll get there. There we go. That's a beautiful trout. All right, so I just caught that really nice brown. I'm pretty psyched about it, but before that I'd had about, I don't know, half a dozen casts or something where nothing had happened. I know it sounds silly to think that that's a little bit of a lull, but it was a little bit of a lull compared to the first little bit where we had quite a few fish in a row. So after that, I've taken a break. I've re-rigged just slightly. Well, actually not super slightly. I've added another fly. I now have a dry and 2 droppers. We're in a place where I can fish 3 flies here. Obviously, don't do this if you're in a place where you're only allowed 2 or 1 fly. But if you're allowed 3 flies, you can fish 3. But I want to take you through this specifically because I was about to talk about casting this rig before that brown trout took my fly. So I will take you through the cast that now is even more important that you do it the specific way that I'm going to talk about, because once you have 2 droppers below dry fly, you are rife for tangles if you aren't careful about how you cast. So what I've done now, I shortened up the distance just a little bit to the first dropper. I'm now just under 3 feet, probably 2 3/4 to that first fly. And then I have another almost 2 feet of tippet hanging below that to another dropper. So I now have 2 Perdigons on. The lower one is an olive diabetes. The upper one is that same pink light bright Perdigon, but now I'm a little bit lighter on both because I have 2 nymphs. I don't need as much weight. I've got 2.3 millimeter beads on both, 2.3 millimeter slotted tungsten beads. So in total, my rig is a little bit longer. Before I had just over 3 feet to my one dropper. Now I have almost 4, maybe 4.5. Because I was not ticking bottom through the gut of the run. So what I wanted to do was get 2 flies so I could also spread them out through the column in case there's some suspended fish, but also just get hopefully a little bit deeper with that point fly. All right, let's talk specifically about casting this rig now. If you try and cast a micro leader, especially once you start adding a dry fly on there, and you try and actually cast back and forth in traditional style vertical over your shoulder, you're going to find out really quickly, number one, it's quite inaccurate, and number two, you're going to end up with tangles. So whenever you're casting a micro leader, I like to cast with a completely sidearm cast. My rod remains almost parallel to the water through the entire stroke, and it's very wrist based. So let me finish this drift and I'll take you through another one. Make a little mend, also feed a little bit of leader in there. I did tick bottom, so that's good. Okay, so I'll change my angle here for just a second so I can show you the cast a little bit more. I've got the point grip, 3-point grip on the rod here, and I'm bending the wrist back to here during the backstroke, and then just basically using only that as my casting stroke. My arm will move a little bit, but my hand never comes back behind the plane of my body. It always stays out in front, right there. And that seems counterproductive or counterintuitive if you've come from a traditional fly line background where you don't want to move that wrist much to maintain a loop. Well, I want to open it up, but also really energize with the short stroke. So I'm doing mostly wrist movement, and as you can see, my rod is almost parallel to the water. So it's at this angle, not up in the air, it's down. It's lateral and parallel to the water. That keeps the flies moving away from the rod on the back cast and also swings them back out around on the forward cast, and it reduces the possibility of me getting a tangle. Because if you start making a cast over the top and you have that dry fly involved on a micro leader, the nymphs can drop through the air in the cast and basically run into your dry fly on the forward cast. So we want to keep that lateral stroke. Let's see if we can get 1 or 2 more fish out of this spot now that I have this rig on. I'm also trying to tuck cast those in a little bit, so I'll talk about that on the next drift. But I need to mend. My leader is now below my dry fly, so I'm going to lift the rod and just move it upstream. I've got enough of a downstream to upstream wind now that a little shake or a lateral lift will help get that leader ahead of the dry fly. And I've also been kind of covering back and forth some water that's closer to me to further away from me. So I'll make one that's a little bit closer to me this time. Let's try that again. And in order to get that to tuck, I drive the initial cast low, and then as my flies have passed the rod, I lift the rod up and stop it hard. And that lets the nymphs hit, and then the dry fly continue in the air to land on top of them. And you'll also know, you can see that the leader continues in this wind to go upstream as well. All right, that one went pretty close to me. So close, in fact, that I've probably spooked that water just from standing here. But we'll let that play out as it gets downstream below me. You can feed some leader with this rig and drift that dry dropper downstream. And I've already gotten one of my fish that way. Okay, let's try a little further across this time. I'm going to go closer to those rocks that are creating the scour. I might hook bottom right away, but if I don't, and I scoot past it, I should get into, yep, I took bottom. So I'm going to stay just off that a little bit this time. And if you're casting into a spot like that, like I just did again, and you know you're on a shelf and you hook bottom right away, especially if you've been doing a tuck cast, back off the tuck. Just let the cast turn over laterally like that. Instead of tucking, just stop the rod a little bit lower, and you can get your flies often to not sink quite as quickly when you release, or you don't release the slack like you would with a tuck cast. So if you have a little more tension on the tippet early in the drift, it takes a while longer for those flies to get down. So you're basically doing the opposite of a tuck cast intentionally to let it roll through that shallow area, so that it doesn't sink until it gets downstream. Okay, I just ticked bottom again. We'll let it roll through that deepest part in the center. I'm going to actually back up just a little bit into the, below those rocks a little more again, into the deepest of the depression, because I haven't gotten anybody closer to the top. And if, oh, okay, ticked bottom, right in the middle of it. So it tells me if I switch to 2 flies, I am getting down a little deeper. Now you'd think that would be the case, but I actually have probably a similar amount of weight as I did before, but it's spread between 2 flies and I do have a little more tippet. So that point fly is ticking where it was not before. And after I run 1 or 2 more through the gut of it, we will go to the far bank here, where I have not really gotten yet. Now, on the far bank, I've got faster water between me and that softer water right near those rocks where it's getting some scour on the outside bank. So I really have to be paying attention, make sure I keep making a few upstream mends, or else that's going to really start to drag. So I watch that colored indicator portion of my leader, and as soon as I see the tippet or that indicator get downstream of my dry fly, I'll make that upstream mend. Oh. Okay, nice big upstream mend there. Like I said, I haven't gotten anything since I made the switch to 2 droppers. So I took off the point fly that I had, and now I have 2 of those pink Lite Brites on, just to see if a fly change will trigger another fish or 2 to eat. Same weights, still a couple of 2.3 millimeters, because I was occasionally ticking bottom in there. I'm pretty confident I have enough weight, at least for the upper part of this depression. I'm going to make maybe 5 more drifts here. We'll give it 5 more drifts, see if I get any more fish, and if I don't, I'm going to roll what I tongue-in-cheek call the cleanup game, where I'm going to grab my nymph rig and we'll throw a mop with a Perdigon above it through this water. And a lot of times after you've kind of gotten a lot of the aggressive fish that are willing to eat quote-unquote normal nymphs from a spot, and then it starts to dry up like it has right now, you can often get a couple more, and oftentimes some of the bigger fish that you may have not gotten to eat your smaller nymphs yet, by rolling either some big attractors through there, or kind of what I consider one of the ultimate attractors being a mop. But also that mop will change the drift, and I'll talk about that in a second. But first, let's see if I can peg one more on this dry and 2 droppers. I'll go back a little bit closer to that bank again, see if there's anybody tucked up closer to those rocks, using them for structure and a hiding place and a little bit of slowed current. So once again, I've got to be pretty assertive about mending over there because it is noticeably slower than the water I've been fishing down the center. And in this case, the wind is helping me with that mend. If you have a down or an upstream to downstream wind, it becomes quite a bit more difficult, and you really have to be aggressive with that mend with a microliter because there's just no mass there. Oops, that looked fishy. Oh, I just heard a fish rise upstream. And again, well, that might be another signal of that we need to move up even into faster feeding water some more. We now have a little bit of overcast conditions here, and we're moving on to about midday, right when that baetis hatch is really going to get going. And it's possible, other than the fish we've already caught in here, that some of them are scooting a little bit forward to that better feeding water at the top of the run. Okay, I'm going to make 2 more drifts. I'm actually going to back up a little bit. Fish some water I haven't hit with this rig yet. Show some flies hopefully to a couple new fish. And then if I don't get anything, we'll grab that other nymph rod and I'll roll the cleanup game. So I took that dry dropper rig and put it on the bank. I have another rod that has the exact same leader on it, but instead I just have a 2-fly nymph rig on the end of the micro leader. So again, the leader in total is about 21 feet. About 14 or 15 feet of that is real thin cider material. And then I've got 6X tippet after that with 2 flies that are about 20 inches apart. And those 2 flies are a cream colored mop that has a 2.8 millimeter bead on it. And then I have a 2.3 millimeter beaded, real small baetis on the dropper. And we're going to see if we can find 1, maybe 2 more fish that I didn't get on that dry dropper rig. I might be willing to eat this different drifting, different food item rig. So one of the reasons that I play the cleanup game with the mop, a lot of times I'll do it just with the standard nymph rig too, through a spot where I've thrown the regular Euro nymph rig through there a bunch of times, caught some fish, and then it dries up. Well, the mop has very unique characteristics in that it's got a ton of surface area on it. All these little interstitial spaces because of that mop chenille that form little gaps. Well, that really slows the sink rate compared to other materials, but it also makes it wiggle and waggle in the water. But in addition, it slows and crawls your rig down. Once that mop is down, it stays down. So I've got wind here that's been affecting my mends and things like that on the dry dropper rig a little bit. Well, especially in this slow water, if I throw this rig through here with a bit of wind, and I had, just a couple of standard nymphs on, my leader's going to get blown around a fair bit. But that mop sort of forms the purpose of an anchor, of that once it gets down, it resists that external force of the wind and keeps your rig down in place and rolls along on the bottom. And if the fish don't like the mop, they hopefully like that suspended Perdigon that's just above it, like that. Whoa, nice rainbow. And guess what? That's exactly what just happened. So this fish didn't eat the mop, but that mop had gotten down, really slowed the rig down, and that's what I get for looking back at the camera right as a rainbow jumped on the line. That fish ate the diabetes Perdigon, and then said goodbye. And then it threw a half hitch in my dropper tag. So let me pick that out. I think I forgot before to mention how big the bead was on the mop. So it's a 2.8 millimeter bead. It's not a terribly heavy mop, but this water's pretty slow, so I don't need a lot of weight. But the diabetes was the one that got it that time, which should make sense considering I'm seeing a few baetis duns rolling down the river. And maybe in a little bit we'll have some risers we can hit on a single dry fly rig, but for now, while they aren't rising, we'll give them 1 or 2 more shots on the nymph rig. Maybe the next one won't come disconnected on that long line release, and I may also just hook bottom. That's the first time I've truly hooked bottom in this run, even though I've ticked quite a few times. But what I was saying on that last fish, that mop that slowed the drift down, really kind of parks it on the bottom, and the mop can slither around a lot too because it doesn't tend to hook bottom in the same way that a lot of other flies will. And then that Perdigon baetis nymph just above it kind of dangles in that current tantalizingly, and fish ends up taking that if it doesn't take the mop, just like that last rainbow did. Well, I'm being tantalized myself. I just heard a fish rise upstream. So we'll give this a couple more drifts, but I might have to go investigate. If you roll it through there a few times and you don't get a fish as well, do a few drifts where you twitch it, just jig the rig a little bit, animate it. Sometimes if they don't want a full dead drift, they will eat it when it's being jigged a little bit and you're just dancing your flies. Don't make it too big. You only want to move them an inch or two at a time. And maybe even sometimes only once or twice in the drift. But it's never a bad thing to try it. Normally you want to let it get down first before you do any animation though. Oh! I just got a little bit crushed on the, I think it was probably on the Perdigon. I felt it go dunk dunk, but I missed it. Normally if they eat the mop, they kind of chew on it, and that was not a chew on it. We'll try that 1 or 2 more times in there now. And then I think I'm gonna go see if I can find that fish that was rising. But even if I don't get another one, at least the cleanup game accounted for 1 more nice big rainbow that jumped off the line. And oftentimes it does even more than that. It can be surprising sometimes how you roll a rig through initially and get some fish, and then, like I say, it dries up, but then you go back through with the cleanup, and sometimes you can get almost as many or more than you did initially. There we go. Good. I have 1 last fish to end on. And same thing. Didn't take the mop again. This one's a little smaller brown trout. Took the diabetes Perdigon that is on the dropper. But that's a duo of flies that works really well together. A mop to slowly sink, but then stay down once it's down. And then a little small, fairly imitative, but subtly flashy Perdigon on the dropper to end up sealing the deal. So certainly not the biggest fish we've gotten out of this spot, but a nice one to end on nonetheless. So I hope I've maybe given you a few things to think about, a few tactics to think about, a little bit of reading the water explanation for you, that when you're in a similar type of water like this, a kind of a nondescript valley stretch of river that doesn't have a lot of water that screams, there are fish here, but there could be fish anywhere. Once you really start drilling down in it, finding those depressions, finding those little places where congregations of fish end up being that maybe at first glance aren't obvious, you can go from having a day where you don't get many fish or none at all to zeroing in on a spot where you get quite a few. Cut.